The Mountain, Part 4. The Storm of Hell. Outside of the mansion, the 7 warriors stood posed in battle formation, awaiting the coming storm that would herald their fate. It seemed the entire mountain knew what was coming, for a small stampede of random creatures came sprinting through the tree line, ignoring the 7 soldiers and dashing past them and down the mountain as quickly as possible. Wade had never seen anything like this. Both bear, mountain lion, deer, fox, squirrel, and rabbit alike all running beside each other, with not the slightest predatorial instinct from the mountain lion or bear to chase any of the easy prey. Like in that one moment, the animals collectively knew that they all just become potential prey to what horrors were heading this way. The forest had become abnormally quiet as well, Wade noticed, with even the very air pressure seeming to start spiking. Directly after Wade and the others noticed this change in the environment, a small pink orb came flying towards them at an incredible speed. "They're here," yelled the fairy as she broke the tree line. "Thank you, Flora," said General Ridden. "You should go ahead and cross the veil and leave, my dear. The ancient possesses dark magic that could even harm the Fey folk." Gladly accepting the order, Flora flew back inside the green and pink elaborate box, as the entire thing disappeared with a bright pink flash and was gone. General Ridden, who was now standing in front of the line of men, turned to face everyone. "It's time," he screamed, as the other 3 Lycans howled a deep battle cry in anticipation for the glory of combat, regardless of the outcome. Wade and Daniel shared a knowing glance at one another before Daniel spoke. "Thank you for saving my life. They would have sniffed me out from the back of the van for sure. So, no matter how this ends, thank you, Wade." "Anytime," answered Wade, before he looked down at the ground and inhaled deeply. "Her name was Sarah," Wade said, now looking back into Daniel's eyes. "My little brother was throwing a party for his birthday, and she didn't want to go. My brother and I had not seen each other in 5 years, and we just moved up here to Washington. So I begged and bugged her repeatedly until I wore her down. She had minor social anxieties, so most of the time she just wanted to relax at home with just the 2 of us. Which I loved about her, because I never really liked social events anyways, but it was my little brother, so I pushed it. Of course, she gave in and came. She always enjoyed making me happy, and I did her. I didn't even drink that night, so we could leave early. She only had 1 cocktail herself, and it was a very short but very sweet visit, in which we both enjoyed, but we were ready to go home and drink some chamomile and cuddle, which was our nightly routine and our best memories of our life. We were T-boned by a drunk driver, some other idiot leaving some worthless party. The report said she died on impact, but she didn't. Not instantly. She said my name as I watched the life leave her eyes. Watched all of our nights drinking tea and cuddling on the couch. Our wedding plans and the daughter that we always wanted to have funneled down her pupils, like 2 black holes pulling away my entire universe. After that night, I lost my purpose and worked only to survive in a world I didn't want to live in without her anymore. I've never been the same since," Wade softly concluded, as he noticed that not only Daniel, but Joan and the Lycans were all staring at him sympathetically. "Do you know why I moved up here, Wade?" John asked. "You lost your wife and you couldn't stand living up in the house you 2 shared any longer," Wade responded before connecting together the events that John had previously explained to him, remembering how Lokran had given him his scars and taken his original hand, and how John had spoke of the beast, how he would filled with a contempt that was beyond just being injured, a contempt that can only originate from a loss of your greatest passion, your love. "He killed her, didn't he?" asked Wade, nodding his head forward towards the forest. "She was a Veil Guardian like myself," John began. "We trained and fought together since we were young, barely teenagers. We were raised our entire lives to defend the Ark families and Arella herself. 20 years ago, the Dark Lord Samael put low the first Lokari and his ancients on a new mission, and they started seizing and corrupting trees of life for their own foul purposes. Among many things the trees can do, they can instantly transmit or teleport you. Rather exactly where you want to go, or exactly where you need to go, depending on the intent of the individual as they pass through it. Because of this, they are very well guarded, and we construct small fortresses around them, putting up protective barriers to keep out evil. The Lokery have already taken 3 trees, and once they corrupt them with dark energy, they can be relocated, so it's not as easy as just regrouping them back up and taking it back. Once they corrupt it, it's virtually gone, and takes much time, power, magic, and resources to scribe for their locations. My life, Rosalina, and I were stationed at the next and closest tree, and we knew they were coming for it soon enough, so we had an extra-large army and more weapons and armaments than usual. Whatever they were taking the trees for had drastically increased Lokery's numbers. We didn't stand a chance. Our defenses were overrun within seconds. Almost everyone I personally asked to be stationed there died, and Lokerin stood above me, ready to finish me off. Rosalina blasted him back with her last orb staff and thrust a teleportation stone on my chest and said Auriella before I could even argue. This brought me directly to Auriella's personal security room, where she was watching the monitor with my wife still on it. As Lokerin charged towards her, she used the last light spell to self-destruct herself. The army, and at that time we assumed Lokerin as well. She sacrificed herself for me, said John in an appreciatively sad tone. Lokerin's distant, demonic laughter can be heard through the forest after John recalled his painful memory to the others. John looked towards the forest, apparently unfazed. He's not like any of the others you know, John said. Lokerin is unique amongst his kind. He is the only Lokery to be born instead of being made, or reborn. He's more than just Lo's creation. He is his biological son, and I don't mean Lo had a son before he was transformed into the first Lokery. No. Ancients can be humanoid-shaped and shrink down about 6 and 6.5 feet tall. They still have to move around in robes or cloaks on this side of the veil though, for their skin will be unnaturally whitish gray, and they still have fangs, claws, and soulless black eyes. The ground began to rhythmically start rumbling in the far distance of the forest, giving a prelude soft beat for the vicious and chaotic melody approaching. "They're coming," whispered Thorn, almost under his breath before John continued. Lo and Samiel spent years perfecting a fertility spell infused with dark and unholy magic, and unfortunately, succeeded. John stared at the ground while pausing to exhale deeply, before finally finding the will to continue on. Lo, in his humanoid form, raped a young virgin girl, and after only 3 hours of incubation, Lokerin's first sentient act was to claw his way out of his mother and consume every ounce of flesh of her. "Freaking hell," Daniel responded, as Wade and the others seemed virtually speechless at being informed to such vile knowledge of the creature they were mere yards away from. Deep, demonic laughter began emanating from the tree line, as the pitch of the amused voice slowly started rising until it took on the familiar and proper tone Lokerin preferred to converse with.
"Sweet mommy dearest, you know I've eaten quite a few virgins since then, but not one as delicious as her. You know the first is always your best, am I right?"
said Lokerin, chuckling ever so slightly, concluding this statement. "One day I'm gonna silence that toxic mouth of yours forever," screamed John with powerful conviction in his voice.
"No time like the present, Johnny boy,"
Lokerin taunted, before taking a few lumbering steps forward, displaying his full and terrifying size, as he stood upright with his shoulders widened and his muscled chest stuck out. The mansion's floodlight lit up the tree line well, showing how truly bigger and different Lokerin was from the normal Lokery, with his skin and fur pitch black and his size considerably bigger. "Pretty tough with an entire army behind you," said Thorn mockingly, as he stepped forward to accept Lokerin's challenge, before Ridden held out a massive arm signaling him to stop. "Don't let his poisonous words infect you," said Ridden. "His time will come." Thorn nodded at Ridden before stepping back into formation, snarling just a bit at Lokerin as he did so.
"That's right, little pup,"
yelled Lokerin.
"Go hide while you—"
Lokerin was violently cut off as the body of another Lokery went crashing into him at an unprecedented speed. At first, Wade thought another Lokery was attacking Lokerin, and apparently, so did he. For Lokerin thrashed around for a couple of seconds before quickly and effortlessly grabbing the other creature's throat and pinning it against another tree. However, he soon realized he was holding the mangled corpse of a subordinate that he sent to look for Wade's scent just the night prior.
"I was wondering what became of you,"
said Lokerin, holding his dead comrade. Lokren closed his massive clawed hand around the dead creature's throat, instantly decapitating it, as he drew his attention in towards the direction the dead creature had originated from. The mansion's guardians turned their heads as well. "It's him!" exclaimed Wade in utter surprise. "It's the giant deer I saw on my way up on the mountain days ago. The eyes are different now, though," observed Wade, referring to the deep dark green that glowed from the deer's eyes, illuminating bright and unnaturally. "The deer seemed even bigger now, too," started Wade before General Ridden spoke up in an imperative tone. "That's no deer," Ridden said in shocked awe. "That's an elemental." "I thought they were supposed to be neutral," asked Thorn. "They are," answered Ridden, unable to give any explanation, even to himself. The deer lightly stomped its right hoof into the ground, and upon doing so, dark green radiating energy began creeping towards the 7 guardians, moving in randomly segmented lines, not unlike veins, before it stopped in front of them, coming together as a recognizable message. If nothing is done, the Lokaru plague will destroy both mankind and forest dwellers alike. I have made a choice to fight for the light, and gave a very close friend my word that if the ancients reached this mansion, I would help stop them. I am here to honor that promise and take a stand. After the 7 guardians read this, the elemental moved to stand in front of the line, now leading the fight against the ancient directly. 8 now stood awaiting the storm of hell that blew their way, united as an unwavering force, as the marching army's footsteps were now so close, it shook the ground with every impact, foretelling the arrival of the abominable threat and their dark eldritch leader. Wade could now feel his chest vibrate from the army's encroaching footfalls and nodded at Daniel once, before pressing the chest adapter on his vest, activating the sword model mech suit, as it formed around him in mere seconds, with Daniel quickly doing the same. Wade now stood over 8 feet tall off the ground, with only his face being visible and illuminated by the suit's face visor. Every inch of his arms, save for his elbows, where large energized blades retracted out, was covered in advanced ammo drums that circled his arms in metal rings, before connecting into 4 barrels at his knuckles that fired explosive rounds at extremely high velocity. This connected down into superheated claws at his fingertips for quick melee combat that held the ability to cut through steel like warm butter. Wade's shoulders bore 2 smart mini turrets, in which one held automatic grenades and the other contained armor-piercing machine gun rounds, which both fired independently from his manual commands, helping produce cover fire for him and his fellow soldiers during intense combat. Both his wrists also had tri-barrel attachment, where the top and large barrel produced a large sword-like blade that was superheated like the claws, where the bottom 2 barrels were actually simply upgraded flamethrowers. Daniel now stood almost 12 feet tall in the much larger and more heavily armored shield mech suit. His only real offensive weapons were his extremities, in which were his fists, elbows, head, knees, and feet were all infused with sensory adapters that caused severe amplified kinetic impact upon striking a target. In other words, one solid punch could almost vaporize a Lokaru's head, or punch through reinforced steel like cardboard. The same could be said about all the suit's other extremities. In addition to these devastating melee attacks, Daniel's mech could also create powerful energy layers from nanoreceptors, which projected out condensed energy from his forearm, creating nearly indestructible shields to protect his fellow warriors, or even crush an opponent to death between 2 at once. When sword and shield mechs fight side by side together fluently, by 2 who have mastered the art, they are nearly unstoppable, said Rose earlier in the training room. Wade hoped Daniel and himself had simply learned enough to survive, and had no reservations about mastering the mech suit's full potential in 5 hours of training. "Alright, does everyone remember our plan with the gifted artifacts?" asked Wade out loud to his compatriots. Thorn held up an obsidian key signaling to Wade that he was ready, as Ridden did with the same translucent golden horn. Reinhardt and Warbane both held up 20mm Inizo rifle and readied themselves. Since the Lycans can fire the gargantuan rifles standing without any kickback, John had customized the rifles to more comfortably fit the wolf's physiology, as well as adding an extended drum barrel clip to highly increase the amount of ammunition that could be held at once. Shadows were now becoming visible through the tree line, as the rhythmic beat of the marching armies hit its crescendo and then stopped completely, about 700 yards away, which was the distance between the forest edge and the mansion's entrance, and the entirety of their battlefield. The silence around them was unlike anything Wade had ever experienced, like the whole existence was holding their breath, awaiting this night's outcome. The unnatural silence was broken by light footsteps of a silhouette much smaller than the rest of the army, breaking through the tree line just enough to be visibly noticed, and then stopped. The figure held out his hands and emanated a wave of black energy that moved like a shock wave until reaching the mansion and made the spotlights rust and corrode in mere seconds, before they crashed to the ground, snuffing out all the light pointed towards the forest. This move was in vain, however, if the figure was trying to take away the warrior's vision, for John simply pushed a button on the side of his helmet he was wearing as an illuminated visor slid down over his face, giving him advanced night vision. As Wade and Daniel's visors simply auto-adjusted immediately to the change of lighting, and seeing as the Lycans already had super enhanced night vision, they made no move whatsoever, as their eyes were illuminated with powerful lunar energy, like the moon itself was always within them. Wade looked around in awe at the world surrounding him now, for unlike the green light of standard night vision goggles, his visor illuminated the world more naturally, like an invisible moon was lighting up the world around him at every angle. And not too bright as to distract him, but just perfect, even lighting up the organic beings such as a Lockery in brighter contrast. Wade briefly wondered if this is how Lycans always saw the night, before his attention was drawn towards the cloaked figure leading the army, no doubt the ancient Lockery, watching as the man removed his hood, showing his white skin and fierce shark-like teeth, and an unreservedly sinister smile. "Steady," said John. "Everybody wait until I give the word." The ancient advanced forward about 50 more yards and then stopped again, as the deer did the exact same. The two powerful entities stood about 400 feet apart from one another, assessing each other's powers respectively. The ancient Lockery and the elemental stood quiet like this for a long moment, before the ancient finally spoke. "You break your own laws standing here this night, elemental," screamed the ancient in a loud, demonic baritone that sounded like it was being played through the loudspeakers from the forest. "If you stand here against me in the open defiance, your neutrality, all of your kind's neutrality and safety will cease to exist, along with the treaty of light and darkness that you have broken." The elemental stomped its hoof aggressively upon the ground, and upon doing so, a large vine covered in dark green glowing runes came forward to life on the tree next to where the ancient stood, and swiftly impaled itself within the back of the closest Lockery foot soldier. The impaled monster went stiff for about half a second before its eyes began glowing a familiar dark green, like the runes of the vine. The monster's body relaxed before standing upright and facing the ancient directly, before conveying his message. "If I do not stand here against the Lockery plague this night, it will keep growing until all forest life becomes snuffed out, and the elementals along with it. I have made my choice, Darkling," said the deer. The earth somehow became even more still, thought Wade. Even the wind itself seemed to be holding its breath, waiting for the battle's conclusion before even daring to exhale. "My army still outnumbers yours 52-8, and those are not fledgling Lockery behind me. I brought only the biggest, strongest, and most capable soldiers, so if you wish to not move and protect this mansion, I will deliver upon you a massacre of my finest effort," said the ancient enthusiastically.
"Sir,"
Logren spoke up, dropping from a nearby tree to land directly in front of the ancient.
"They received aid from a powerful entity. It would be wise to hold for more reinforcements, sir. I think the entity was..."
"Silence!" screamed the ancient impatiently. "Your pre-strike unit has failed, and I do not need advice from the overrated prodigal son," yelled the ancient.
"Elrock!"
screamed Logren loudly and almost aggressively.
"Listen to me."
However, the ancient, who was apparently named Elrock, swung a massive shadow-like claw appendage that emerged from his right hand, striking at Logren. Impressively though, Logren was too fast, dodging his strike and jumping back, where he took a battle stance in which his enormous claws began coalescing dark shadow-like energy that made the grass, trees, and every living thing within 10 feet of Logren instantly begin to rot and wither away, until it was nothing more than ash.
"If you're not going to help fight," said Elrock, "then why don't you just run back on home to Daddy and tell the Master that I will be bringing both John and the Elemental's head back to adorn his halls with. Be sure to tell him that after you explain how horribly you failed here,"
said the ancient mockingly to Lokrin.
After who I saw here tonight, the tree will be of little importance to Lord Salmiel. This mountain will be your tomb, Elrock.
Lokrin said, grinning, before jumping back into the treetops with one amazing leap. Wade couldn't tell for sure, but it appeared Lokrin almost glided up through the air effortlessly, after leaping an incredible distance.
"Fine,"
hissed Elrock.
"Getting out of my way is the most helpful you've been so far,"
he said to Lokrin contemptibly. Elrock turned on his heel swiftly to face the Guardians, as black shadows began pouring from him like dark sentient smoke.
"Last chance. Will you move, or will you die?"
asked the ancient Lokri, as the shadows swirling around him began to intensify. The Guardian stood poised and resolute before John squeezed his metallic hand into a fist, making the engraved runes glow like fire as flames began to writhe around his closed hand. Ridden pulled out an enormous longsword with yellowish golden runes glowing deep upon its blade, as the air around the sword itself seemed to shimmer, like heat rising off of asphalt on the hottest day of the summer. Thorn pulled an elegant yet dangerous-looking platinum-colored spear that seemed to grow much longer once he unsheathed it from his back. The spear's blade and shaft were covered in whitish blue-colored runes, in which strong electrical currents danced between them, begging to be unleashed. The spear tip alone had now grown long and large enough to cut a Lokri in half, with the weapon's entire reach spanning about 10 feet long at its full length. But Wade had a feeling that Thorn could will the blade to be shorter if the battle called for it. Ridden and Thorn both thrust their weapons into the ground respectively to be at the ready, before Ridden picked up a minigun and Thorn an automatic grenade launcher. Reinhardt and Warbane picked up their Anizo 20mm rifles and stood at the ready, not yet unsheathing their melee weaponry.
I was hoping for this,"
said Elrock excitedly as he held out his arms outstretched and stared upwards to the night sky.
"It's been a very long time since I was able to have some real fun, let alone unfurl and be able to stretch out with my true form and unleash my full power."
The air seemed to both spike in pressure and take on an unnatural chill, as the shadows around Elrock now fully enveloped him, where deep beast-like roars began growing in volume and lowering in pitch. This continued until nothing but a Vanta-black voided-out sphere was all that was visible, until an oversized clawed arm longer than any Greyhound bus emerged from the void, shaking the earth as it impacted the ground. Succeeding its other massive arm, the beast's head exited the shadow in a glorious, horrific spectacle. For where normal Lokri had parts of their head symmetrically infused with bone-like exoskeleton, the entirety of the ancient's face and head were covered in this marrow-like armor. The simplest description Wade could mentally fathom at that time was if a Lokri foot soldier was mixed with a dragon of the most dark and demonic, esoteric origins. Even its fur wasn't fur, but the same shadow-like energy in which he was emerging from, just mimicking fur. This black energy shrouded the core of the ancient's body like a dark and intelligent blanket that moved in its own jerky and unnerving motions, like it was a whole entire other monster itself. Elrock now stood on all fours in a more fixed quadrupedal state now, almost as tall as the 7-story mansion, appearing like some kind of bone dragon, an abomination of the most unholy and eldritch design. Before Wade could properly start worrying about Elrock's new size and how the elemental could possibly fare against such a behemoth, the deer raised high on its hind legs and came down hard on the earth with its front hooves, instantly doubling its own size as it did so, causing dark green flames to engulf its antlers as lightning of the same color surged around the tips of them. The elemental repeated this process twice more until it not only matched Elrock's size, but its own antlers stood even taller and more prominent than the ancient's now, with its eyes completely blazing in dark green. The elemental stomped its hooves to the ground more softly this time, causing 2 dark green illuminated lines to shoot through the ground from its hooves before breaking wide and darting to parallel sides of the army deep into the forest. Powerfully frightening cracking and crashing sounds went off around the army, making them move closer together, before something very large burst through the tree line on the opposing side of the army. Even after everything Wade had witnessed, he was having trouble believing that the 2 full-grown red cedar trees had just come to life and began moving on opposing sides of the battlefield until they stopped halfway, probably to keep the Lokri from flanking us by encircling around. The trees had merged all their many limbs into one large arm like an appendage on each side, and did the same with their roots, forming rudimentary legs and feet. They had vague human expressions where Wade assumed their faces would be, with the leaves of course coming together to make hair of large bark-covered faces. However, Elrock wasn't waiting around for the elemental to reveal any more tricks, and with an ungodly, loud, demonic battle cry of the Purge Rage, the fight had officially begun. With the 50 experienced elite Lokri soldiers following their master into the fray, yipping rapidly like hungry hyenas about to feast on a nest of prey. "Now!" John yelled, and thorned through the large obsidian key covered in flame ruins, directly in front and slightly into the onslaught of charging beasts, with over a dozen creatures passing the key landfall before it actually hit the ground, making it land almost in the middle of the army, as the rest of the Lycans began firing their long-ranged weaponry at the front of the stampede. In truth, not one of the Guardians knew what kind of outcome to expect from the handsome man's unorthodox gifts. So as the first item neared the ground, like the wind, they held their breaths in hopeful anticipation. A slight tremor went through the earth as the first key hit the ground, felt by Guardian and attacker alike, before an all-consuming roaring sound, similar to the speeding locomotive, issued through the mountain, followed by what sounded eerily like billions of rage-filled screams and fear-ridden cries as the front line of the creature seemed to be pulled back and down quicker than Wade's eyes could even fully process. The same thing began happening to the center of the army, where the obsidian key had landed, with Lokri disappearing everywhere, until a black massive hole became visible upon the ground, radiating a deep orange and red glow, in which the horrific screams and desperate cries echoed from. As soon as the hole became visible, it vanished just as quick, taking the screams and cries with it, and leaving only a sulfuric smell in the air. The entire event must have only lasted about 3 seconds, thought Wade. But in that short time, almost half of Elrock's army were disposed of in a fate that Wade assumed to be worse than death. Or maybe monsters like that were honored as heroes, in what Wade assumed must have been hell itself. That was the key to the gates of hell, remarked Ridden in a complete shock and awe, confirming Wade's suspicion. But how did? Ridden began before watching the remaining Lokri quickly regroup and ready another charge. Well, let's see what's behind door number 2, shall we? Thorn said comically, nodding towards the elegant golden horn that Ridden almost forgot he was holding, due to the battle's powerful shift starting to charge right in front of him. Wait for the second charge, like Mr. Handsome said, whispered Wade. If we get another event like that, the battle will be all but won, said John confidently. Everyone get their long-ranged weapons back up, ordered Ridden. Don't let them breathe for a second, he said as he put the horn to his mouth in preparation. Wade kept being taken aback at how well the Lycans could talk and enunciate their words with all those imposing fangs and their canines-like snout. However, they were part human, Wade reminded himself. Wade's illuminated visor displayed the only 19 Lokri now remained, including Elrock and Lokren, which meant 24 of them had been sent straight to hell, while 9 of them had been taken out by the Guardian's long-range weaponry. With another thundering roar from the Ancient, the rest of the army charged once again. Ridden blew into the second artifact, and unlike the sounds produced priorly, a noise more similar to a choir of singing angels issued through the horn, along with its beautiful trumpet-like sound. After the horn was used, it materialized into a glorious, sparkling golden light that shot into the night sky like a comet. The second the golden rocket of light disappeared into the sky, so did the night itself, along with any fear or doubt the Guardians held in their hearts. For rising behind them, like a glorious spotlight from heaven, was the morning sun, and it did not rise alone. Following the ascension of the morning sun was an orchestra unlike anything Wade had ever heard, forcing the rampaging army to stop in their place and put their oversized hands over both their eyes and ears, as if they could not handle such benevolent sights and sounds. The Guardians wasted no time in firing at the stunned monsters, taking down 2 before Elrock created a circle of dark shadow energy form around the army, corroding the bullets before they ever came close to making contact with an enemy, as the same dark energy now hovered around their heads, removing any unpleasant sights and sounds that were previously stunning them. Before the dark shield was erected by the Ancient, about 4 or 5 creatures tried running to the sides, only to be quickly eviscerated by the tree links. Wade's visor now showed 15 Lokery remaining as Elrock sent the circle of dark energy flying powerfully in all directions, rotting away any part of the treeling's body as the wave of corrosion hit them, hurting them, but not at all taking them out of the fight. As the dark waves came closer to the Guardians, they all braced for impact, before Daniel knelt down on his knees and extended his arms wide and outstretched, using every ounce of his mech suit power to create one very long rectangular shield that, at the last moment, saved everyone, and even spared the 2 smart turrets. Although not hurt, Daniel's shields now went down from 100% to 89% as he stood up and readied his overpowered appendages for incoming combat. Elrock himself led the charge this time, and as he and the elemental charged furiously at one another, their antlers clashed so hard that it sent shockwaves through the mountain. At this time, the charging army had reached the line of the warriors, crashing into them, as the battle reached its pinnacle now, hand-to-hand combat. 2 Lokery simultaneously went over and under Wade's fists, blasting the explosive machine gun fire, as one grabbed his arm and the other his leg, throwing him into Daniel before he could activate his shield or attempt to catch Wade. The force sent both of them crashing into the Warbane, knocking him down as Lokery jumped high and tried coming down hard on Warbane, as the Lycan positioned the Niza that he was holding upwards and blew the monster in half, with its upper body exploding in the process. Warbane rose quickly and unfazed, pulling out an enormous battle axe that glowed red and superheated, as if it had just been pulled out of the blacksmith's forge and possessed one long sigil across each of its double-bladed heads that glowed red. Wade noticed that he had similar smaller axes hooked up to his armor belt that glowed in the same fashion. Warbane quickly charged at the group of Lokery, swiping his blade towards the ground, making a wave of fire shoot towards the creature's legs. As the 3 Lokery jumped high enough to dodge his attack and come down on the Lycan with their claws. This must have been Warbane's plan all along. However, for he knowingly jumped back and he readied his axe before the creature could even begin to change their course. Smiling like a baseball player that knows he's about to hit a home run, Warbane swung hard and true, cutting the closest 2 monsters in half, whilst cauterizing their wound, as the second was sliced open and burnt severely, so he died moments later. As Wade and Daniel stood, a Lokery went flying into Wade before Daniel stopped it with his right shield arm, sending it flying back towards the ground, hurt and stunned, where Wade instantly blew it into pieces with his arm machine gun module. Another Lokery began advancing on Wade as he unleashed his arm turrets again, but this creature knew enough to zigzag back and forth very quickly, making Wade miss almost most of his shots as the creature closed the distance. Due to the frantic chaos unfolding around them, Daniel did not notice the Lokery crouching behind him, charging up its signal and deadly dash attack. So when he went to block the incoming creature from getting Wade, he was blindsided by an overwhelmingly blow to the back of his helmet, bringing his armor now down to 70%, as the blow knocked him against the mansion and then to the ground. Wade gave up on his hand turrets and activated his twin forearm blades. The creature ducked his first strike and, using the momentum it built up, running to grab the arm Wade missed with, spinning him around with surprising strength until he crashed into Daniel yet again, before the young man had even fully recovered from his previous attack. Before the creature had let go of Wade's arm while swinging him, he managed one desperate slice with his other blade that managed to cut off the monster's arm. Wade noticed something different about this Lokery. What he mistook for ill-fitting armor was actually a small metal box attached to his chest with a small blinking light. Wade remembered his training with Rose and how she always emphasized to always trust your instincts in battle, and his instincts were screaming a word at him that he instantly yelled out loud through his visor's loudspeaker. "Bomb!" The Lokery was then close enough not only to take out Wade and Daniel, but Ridden and Thorn as well. Before he could consider the decision, Daniel jumped in front of everyone and extended his left arm's nanoshield just in time to take on the majority of the explosion. When the smoke cleared, not one Guardian was hurt, although Daniel's left arm on the mech suit was completely destroyed. His real arm was fine, and a blue nano mesh shield covered the breached portion of the mech suit, protecting Daniel and diverting his shields, which now read 39%. The giant explosion had caused most everyone's attention, causing a brief pause in the battle, where Wade saw the runes of John's hand glow white now, holding a Loker in midair with some kind of telekinetic power, before his hand's runes switched to glowing red, where an energy blade the same color manifested from his hand, as the creature fell from the release of its telekinetic hold and was impaled upon the red blade. As the creature fell onto his red blade, he simply moved his hand back and forth quickly, dissecting the beast before its weight pulled John down. This unfortunately made black blood cover John's head and body, having to use his normal hand to physically wipe gore off his face. Before Wade could take in anything else, the battle renewed itself and chaos once again filled the air. The forest elemental and the ancient Lokery had yet to deal each other any real damage, and were still clashing massive antlers, sending sparks of dark green and spurts of misty black shadow everywhere from their specific energy signatures contained within the core of one another's antlers. Like life and death frantically fighting one another as they desperately looked for weaknesses. Everywhere the green sparks hit the ground, new life would instantly emerge from it, usually a larger flower or small tree, as when the ancient's black smoky sludge hit the ground, it instantly killed or rotted any life, leaving black smoking holes and beautiful floral patterns all around them as they clashed on. Wade and Daniel both moved to help Ridden, who was battling two oversized and abnormally large Lokery soldiers. When both creatures attempted lunging at Ridden from opposing sides, he simultaneously jumped back and spun around, swinging his longsword, and connecting with one of the creature's midsections as thunder roared from his blade, loud and deafening, sending each half of the monsters flying about 120 yards apart, flying in opposite directions. As Ridden confidently stepped forward to destroy the other Lokery that had tried lunging at him, he yelled at Wade and Daniel to help Thorn, who was surrounded by 4 Lokery, as 2 more were heading his way, as Reinhardt and Warbane were busy handling the others with John's help. The creatures seemed to be trying to send the majority of their numbers to Thorn, as if he was the greatest threat. And oh boy, was he, Wade and Daniel soon witnessed. Wielding his lightning spear, Thorn moved effortlessly between the creatures, using such martial arts tactics that Wade thought it looked more like dancing than fighting for his very life. Every turn and spin Thorn executed connected on some vital portion of the creatures around him, both cutting them open and electrocuting them in unison. As a Lokery lunged at Thorn from behind, he lunged forward and kicked off the front monster's chest, crushing part of its chest as he used the momentum to flip backwards, soaring over the creature, advancing behind him upside down, whilst pushing his spear tip downwards, slicing open the creature's chest above its heart. While the wound itself wasn't deep enough to kill the monster, the lightning electrocuted its heart, killing it before Thorn even landed on the ground. As Thorn hit the ground, he brought his spear down hard on the earth, sending a stream of lightning into the ground, soaring towards the other charging creature's feet, then climbing his body until its entire form was covered in lightning, before going limp seconds later, hitting the ground as Thorn was already on the move again, rushing towards 3 more creatures running towards him in a spear formation. He threw his spear hard into the chest of the creature leading the attack, killing it instantly as he jumped over the impaled Lokery while grabbing his spear from the monster's chest, ripping it apart as he did so before landing a good distance away. The creature to his right had quickly moved upon him as he swung its claws at him, only for his spear to block the attack while pushing the Lokery's arm down and locking it in place with the spear's shaft as he used his bare claw to swipe at the creature's head, completely ripping its lower jaw off in the process. The creature on his left, however, was just fast enough to claw Thorn's side, which was mostly absorbed by the armor as he winced in minor pain and was knocked to the ground, where the creature wasted no time in jumping up high and coming down on him, with a killing blow to the face. However, the only thing that met the creature as it reached Thorn was a spear's tip through its head. With the others now taking out the remaining Lokery, Thorn, Wade, and Daniel looked at one another in victory, except for the Battle of the Titans was still in stalemate by the deer and Elrock, for even a weakened ancient Lokery would destroy the Guardians most likely, unless they could help the Elemental right now. Once the Guardians regrouped, they started to head towards the ongoing battle to aid the Elemental, but unknown to all, even Elrock, Lokren apparently had given a retainer of Lokery a teleportation stone, for in a flash of dark blue, 13 Lokery came gliding out of the treetops, with furry underwings similar to a flying squirrel. They were led by Lokren himself, whose underwings looked more like a bat than his furry compatriots. The Guardians did not notice the airborne platoon hovering their way, and just as one of the flying creatures was about to claw the back of Thorn's head, Daniel saw it and used his remaining arm to grab the creature from behind its antlers and viciously pull back down and hard, with all of the mech suit's strength, hyperextending its neck and back until the monster's spine ripped out of its own throat. Wade began sending the remaining explosive machine gun fire up towards the hovering threat, only managing to kill one, as they moved so quickly and gracefully in the air. This left 10 Lokri soldiers now, including Lokren, who glided up very high to the sides of the battlefield with another Lokri going in the opposite direction. The treeling tried to swing at Lokren, but the monster just latched onto his arm, rotting away the tree anywhere he touched it, before hastily scaling the arm to the head, where an oversized fish shrouded in dark shadow punched through the back of the treeling's head like weak particle board. Wade noticed the other Lokri was trying to do the same to the other treeling, but was having much more difficulty than Lokren. But he had to worry about the 10 Lokri surrounding the Guardians now, and focus his attacks on them. Wade managed to kill another Lokri with his arm blades and wound another as the remaining Guardians were working perfectly together, dispatching the new Lokri as if it was just another day at work. Wade marveled at their skill, strength, and speed, especially Thorn. He seemed to operate on a whole nother level than the others when it came to combat, a true prodigy of war. As a smile started to come across Wade's face, he was hit extremely hard in the back, knocking him down, bringing his shields to 71%. As Wade stood, he saw Lokren on the back of the other treeling's back, riding its headless and armless body to the ground before leaping a great distance back into the air before the tree began its deceased descent and took off gliding elsewhere. Wade looked at the wooden arm about 70 feet long on the ground beside him and assumed Lokren had hit him dead in the treeling's arm before the appendage kept rotting until it withered to nothing more than a pile of rotten sawdust. "Daniel!" yelled Wade. "Follow me," as he just seen Lokren flying through the air towards the mansion. Wade could see fleshy veins and tendons tipped with talons that made up his underwings, reminding Wade of some kind of demonic sugar glider as he floated closer. The smart turrets began to fire at the hovering monstrosity, with Lokren using his dark shadow energy, coalescing around his claws to corrode the bullets into powder rust before they even came close enough to make contact with him. Before Lokren glided behind the mansion and out of sight, he landed behind one of the smart turrets, where he simply held out his shadow-covered hand, and Wade watched as the metal turret rusted away to nothing in front of his very eyes, before Lokren jumped high and far towards the other turret and repeated the process. The Guardians were making short work of Lokren's hovering backup, with all the warriors save for John and Thorn had picked up miniguns, anizos, and heat-seeking rocket launchers practically obliterating the monsters before they could try and make landfall, with the remaining 4 Lokri making their way around the mansion for cover and to no doubt try and come up behind the others, who were busy aiming upwards towards the sky and its vile inhabitants. John ran the opposite direction of the flying Lokri as to try and surprise them, while Thorn had very quickly scaled the entire 7-story mansion, unbeknownst to the hovering creatures. As the Lokri glided around the corner of the mansion, they briefly made a line, and at that very moment, Thorn threw his lightning spear directly through the line, impaling 3 of the creatures to death, as the third spewed away at the last moment, only to be met with a large ball of fire from John's hand, as the beast fell to the ground in a flaming dead heap. Thorn pulled his spear out of the Lokris, who laid upon the ground impaled like a demonic shish kebab, with lightning still arcing between the dead bodies. Wade's visor now showed that all the Lokri were dead, save for Lokren and Elrock, the 2 most dangerous threats. Wade saw Lokren crouched behind the side of the mansion after John and Thorn joined the others, and aimed what was left of the left arm's explosive rounds at this monstrosity, before a loud cracking sound was heard behind him. As Wade spun around, Elrock was flying towards him upside down, for apparently the deer had given up clashing antlers and spun around quickly, kicking the ancient with its hind legs, sending him flying towards the mansion and Wade. Elrock hit Wade hard, sending them both into the mansion and cracking its walls slightly, but not activating the protective barrier, most likely due to Wade's close proximity to it. When the ancient arose, it saw Wade on the ground and gave him a mighty stomp with his front clawed leg, sending his shields to 13%, and raised its leg to finish off Wade, for his shields could no way take another hit of that magnitude. Wade exhaled and closed his eyes, accepting his inevitable fate with a smile on his face, and thanked God for allowing him to be a part of something so important. Thanked him for even briefly giving his life what had been missing since Sarah had died. Purpose. For in a world that can make you feel so useless, so worthless, what more could one ask for? Thank you, Wade said conclusively. As the shadows of Elrock's giant leg grew closer, Wade's visor filled with a dark green light that overwhelmed the encroaching darkness, freezing the ancient's leg in place before it could crush Wade to death. Not wasting the unexpected opportunity, Wade swiftly rolled out of the way and stood up to view the screen. Before Elrock could finish him off, the elemental had shot a strong and steady stream of dark green lightning, not only damaging the ancient, but freezing him in place so Wade could escape. The elemental, who has lived for vast centuries or more and owed Wade nothing, had just risked its life and most of its power to save him. The latter statement proved true, for as the deer released Elrock from the electrifying grip, it was physically exhausted, visibly panting as it lowered its majestic antlers in an attempt to regain some energy while still staying guard of the ancient, who was shakingly making it to all fours. Although injured, Elrock obviously had far more energy than the deer, due to it saving Wade's life. Wade glancing around to see if anyone else could help save the deer, even though the Guardians were no match for Elrock, even together. Plus, they were dealing with about 6 more Lokri than Wade's visor had picked up, due to extreme technical damage. Or perhaps Lokrin had yet another teleportation stone to help summon help. Reinhardt raced forward, wielding a massive hammer that glowed in a yellowish golden runes. As he met the first 3 Lokri, he raised his hammer high as possible, seemingly to smash the creature in front. However, this was a trick by the Lycan, one that the creatures fell for instantly, for as the seemingly vulnerable Reinhardt held his hammer so high, it left his legs exposed. The Lokri lunged for Reinhardt's leg where there was a gap in the armor, just as the Lycan to jump and stomp on the creature's head, while leaping to the side and back, swinging his hammer into the Lokri on his right that sought to flank him. The weapon let out a thunderous roar, similar to Ridden's longsword, before the creatures were obliterated upon impact, with small chunks of gore and bits of antlers flying in every direction, leaving a circle of black mist where the creature's foul blood was literally vaporized. Reinhardt jumped in the air after completing his attack and came down furiously hard on the Lokri he'd previously stomped into the ground, destroying it before he could fully recover. By this time, Wade had saw the rest of the Guardians, minus Daniel, who remained in close proximity to him, had joined Reinhardt and were annihilating the remaining Lokri soldiers. Wade began to notice a change in the air and the environment around him, as the orchestra of beautiful lights and benevolent sounds above the battlefield had grown into much, much more now, for an aurora borealis of what appeared to be rainbows now illuminated the sky above them. Wade assumed his mind simply couldn't comprehend the colors above him, colors that don't exist in this reality, the colors of heaven, so his mind just projected every familiar color at once, to compensate seeing something his eyes and very brain couldn't fully process, hence the amalgamation of rainbow-like waves above him. Furthermore, that was not all the sky now held. For its glorious disbelief, Wade saw 4 large winged figures circling the unnaturally beautiful lights, barely visible as shadowed silhouettes, as they were so very high above everyone. More alive and free than he ever thought possible, Wade stood among a raging sea of war and chaos, somewhere between heaven and hell. Wade's heightened senses were now making the entire battle seem calmer, like it was slowing down a bit, or so he thought at first. The battlefield kept slowing down until a panic started to come over Wade, for what he mistook for some heightened battle sense was in fact reality itself continually slowing down, until the battle and its very participants, along with the very air itself, stood completely frozen in time. Wade looked around frantically, trying to desperately find an explanation to what had just occurred, but only finding his further shock that both friends and foes were positioned as still and immobile as wax figurines, except for Reinhardt, who oddly had disappeared from the scene altogether. Wade saw the elemental with its head down, looking absolutely drained, and he saw Elrock, who made it to his feet, who was about to begin another frantic charge towards the tired deer. Wade saw the Guardians circling the last 2 Lokri, closing in for the kill, as Lokrin used his newly summoned brethren as nothing more than a distraction, as he saw Lokrin creeping completely unnoticed behind John, with its long and overpowered arm raised up and shrouded in dark energy, seconds away from delivering a fatal blow to the preoccupied Veil Guardian. Then, wholly unexpected, Wade heard something. Or at least Wade thought he heard his name, thought he heard the voice of Wade. The voice sounded out louder and unmistakable this time, cutting off his thought. Wade began trembling as he glanced at Lokran to make sure the beast was not mimicking her voice again, but the foul creature remained frozen in place, still in attack position behind John. Wade, the voice said again behind him, but softer and more grounded this time, without the faraway ethereal edge on it. Tears began flowing freely down Wade's face as he smiled and turned to face the voice's master. Sarah. Wade barely managed to choke out between his tears and fell to his knees, as his legs refused to work right, as he was overwhelmed with love and happiness. Before any words were properly exchanged, Sarah ran over and dropped to her knees to be at Wade's level, somehow phasing through his suit effortlessly, as she embraced him tightly. "I am so proud of you," she exclaimed. "I told you that you're going to do great things one day, my love," Sarah said to Wade, smiling, with golden lights somewhat visible around her head. Yes, you did," answered Wade, as they both laughed and cried at the same time. "This battle is almost won," said Wade. "I'm ready to go with you now, Sarah. I've always been ready." "I love you, Wade," she said wholeheartedly and with the entirety of her soul, as she softly touched his cheek and gently wiped away a tear, once again defying every law of science, nature, and even heaven and hell. "After this day, the world will begin changing forever," Sarah began. "Laws, rules, and reality itself will be rewritten. It's up to you, Wade, right now to decide if the world will be rewritten in the light of the creation and love, or the shadow of darkness, which will herald unspeakable evil. I just want to go home with you, into the light. Please." "You will, my love, I promise, but the world needs you, Wade, and it needs you right now, my love." Wade smiled and covered Sarah's hand that was placed lovingly on his cheek. "What must I do, my love?" asked Wade confidently now. "You must see," Sarah said, as a light composed of the same unfathomable rainbow essence soared down from heaven and into Sarah's head, which now held a beautiful halo where it transferred to her hand, then into Wade's very mind and soul, lighting his eyes up with heavenly light as a tidal wave of images and potential scenarios flooded his consciousness. Wade instantly saw a second regiment of even more Lokari foot soldiers marching towards the Veil, in which Elrock had torn, and saw that they were mere minutes away. Wade saw Elrock kill the elemental after completing the charge in which he was currently frozen in. Wade saw Lokran killing John and then wounding Ridden before he teleported away with his seemingly endless supply of extremely rare dark blue stones. Wade saw a tree of life inside the locked room in John's mansion, and that, in truth, it was never truly 7 levels high, just the bottom living area, the top floor which John's bedroom and private quarters, and the rest was hollowed out to house the tree itself. Wade saw the ancient Lokari enter the tree, and then the whole of the world, both sides of the Veil being covered in an all-consuming shadow, a true Lokari plague, among much worse. Furthermore, Wade saw everything he must do, exactly in the order to prevent this, and then embrace that reality as he came back to the present. "I can hold time until you physically act, until you make your first move," said Sarah. Wade kissed her, and precisely at that exact time, they each said, "I love you." Smiling at his beloved one last time, Wade grabbed one of the Anizo rifles the Lycans had dropped, and using his suit's strength, he aimed the massive rifle at Lokran's frozen form as he crept behind John to kill him. Everything must be done perfect, thought Wade, whose damaged suit at this point looked more like scrap metal, being barely able to be held together by his suit's nanoshield, which glowed blue between damaged chunks of steel. Exhaling slowly, Wade squeezed the trigger, and the moment the 20mm rifle shell tore through Lokran's chest, time once again renewed itself. As the heavens above closed their gates, the lights, noises, and Sarah were pulled back within a large halo in the sky as the morning sun dissipated back into the dark void of the new moon's night. Wade had just put an armor-piercing bullet the size of a small rocket through Lokren's chest, yet he lived. Lokren recovered to his feet weakly as he clutched the gaping wound in his chest as Jun spun around with the runes upon his metal hand glowing a blood red, with a large, energized blade the same color emerging forth. He ran at Lokren and swung hard, only for his blade to be blocked by Lokren's dark black glowing clawed hand, the one that wasn't clutching at his chest wound. They fought like this for a small moment, each one parrying or blocking the other's attack whilst countering with their own move, before Wade came in with his arm's superheated blade and tried to decapitate Lokren on the spot while being preoccupied, just for the creature to once again disappear in a dark blue flash. "Sneaky bastard," yelled Ridden, as John turned to scream at Wade for ruining his revenge. But Wade cut everyone off instantly. "There's a second regiment of even more Lokri that will cross the Veil in less than 10 minutes, screamed Wade without a semblance of doubt in his voice. This exclamatory statement had most definitely grabbed everyone's attention, save for Reinhardt, who was looking around the battlefield, or even more specifically, at Elrock with intense concentration and an unwavering proud stance. The rest of the Guardians looked at Wade in confused panic, as Wade turned to see Elrock closing in on the deer far too quickly, and feared they were already out of time, before the elemental let out a deafening yet beautiful cry for help, which was quickly answered. A great humanoid being composed of pure fire, standing about 8 feet tall, emerged from the earth directly in front of the rapidly approaching ancient, and lit itself up bright and hot like a phoenix, stopping Elrock in place, while slightly burning his face and chest. 2 more humanoid-like figures emerged from the earth behind Elrock, one constructed of the earth rock itself, and the other was made out of water. Another final shape materialized above the ancient Lokri, being a man composed of air itself as it grinded down on Elrock, before the rock humanoid grabbed Elrock's right leg and held him tight, as the man of water grabbed the ancient's other leg before instantly turning himself into ice, freezing the leg solidly in place. Wade's hope ignited again, to turn to Daniel to speak as quickly as he could. "We both have to nano-disperse at the same time at the ancient Elrock." "Nano what?" asked Daniel, puzzled. "We've done this 3 times with Roseman. Come on," said Wade impatiently before slapping his suit chest, saying, slowly but loudly, "Nano." Then Wade thrust his arms towards Elrock, again saying slowly, "Dispersion." "Oh," Daniel said, catching on. "The supersuit throw," he said. "Yes," answered Wade, exhaling exhaustively. "We have to perform the supersuit throw, reluctantly, at the exact same time at Elrock. It's the only way we can knock that guy down and damage him enough to both save the forest elemental and give us a fighting chance," said Wade. "The only way to prevent the second army from crossing the Veil is to kill Elrock, the Ancient, right now," said Wade, emphasizing the great importance of this task. "We don't have time to waste, come on," yelled Wade, as Daniel and himself began moving to Elrock. "Wait," yelled the deep voice of Reinhardt commandingly. "That won't be enough," he yelled to everyone now. "What do you mean?" asked Wade impatiently. "I mean," Reinhardt began, "you're not the only one who was visited by someone through the gates of heaven, not the only one who was given a vision of what must be done." "It's possible," said John. "Heaven was opened, and that must be the real gift of the Golden Horn. Instead of just temporarily blinding the monsters, I trust Reinhardt with my life, and if he says that Wade and himself were visited by angels, then I believe him," concluded John, with conviction in his voice. "Agreed," said Ridden. "What do you need of us to do?" "Just keep any potential threats away from the boys after the nano disperse and are vulnerable. I'll do the rest." Wasting no time, Reinhardt yelled for Wade and Daniel to go, and as they did, he turned to Thorn and placed his hand on his shoulder. Reinhardt then held out his hammer and handed it to Thorn. "Here, make sure someone worthy gets this weapon, little brother. You're a good judge of character, so I'll know you'll make the right choice." "No," said Thorn, backing up from him. "We'll fight him together." Reinhardt placed his hammer at Thorn's feet, as he smiled and looked into Thorn's eyes lovingly. "It wasn't an angel. Mom says she loves you and that your father would be so proud of you." "I'm so proud of you, Thornwald. You were born the runt, but have surpassed even myself in being a great warrior. You deserve that silver armor, and one day, the gold. I was shown what storm of hell is coming to the world, what unspeakable dark power. The world is gonna need you, Thornwald. I love you, little brother, concluded Reinhardt sincerely. Keep him back, John. That is the only way. It's been an honor serving with each of you, exclaimed Reinhardt, before he outstretched his arms wide. No! Yelled Thorn, running at his brother desperately before the runes of John's hand began glowing white again as he used telekinesis to hold Thorn in place, as Thorn began roaring wildly, before the sound quickly changed into a sad whimper. Brother, no! Thorn kept crying as Reinhardt began to pray. Creator of life, be I worthy, ascend me into heaven, and thus before I return, may the light you once breathed into me as life shine as its brightest, one last time. Nearing the end of his prayer, Reinhardt's voice started becoming more ethereal sounding than physical. Like with every word he said, his body became more energy than physical matter. Reinhardt's eyes had remained closed during his prayer, while a steady building golden aura became more visible around him with every word he said, and after concluding his prayer to the Creator, he opened his eyes, which glowed the same golden, almost blinding energy. Reinhardt instantly took off running at an unprecedented speed, leaving a trail of glittering gold cinders in his wake, while flanking the other side of Elrock. The boys without hesitation began their nano dispersion tactic on the opposing side of Elrock, just after the Ancient had broken free from its rear attackers, sending chunks of ice and rock flying behind him, as the aforementioned humanoids were obliterated by Elrock's massively clawed hind legs. The Ancient then began lashing through the walls of air and fire created by the remaining humanoid protectors with his claws, making rather quick work of them, only taking on some minor burns and abrasions in which he was already starting to heal from. Now! Yelled Wade as Daniel and himself hit their glowing chest adapters and pointed both of their arms towards Elrock, sending a hailstorm of metal and blue energy directly into the Ancient, viciously. The attack staggered him to the side as he fell to his knees in pain, as fountains of black blood poured from multiple lacerations on him, along with bad burns from the blue nano shields. Elrock began laughing as he slowly began making it to his feet, before a roaring comet of golden light, which echoed an otherworldly deep battle cry, came soaring from the sky towards Elrock's face as he was halfway from standing back up. Elrock raised his head and instantly opened its enormous maw, seemingly to crush Reinhardt to death in its oversized jaws, but was only met with an explosion of pure light, about 1,000 times brighter than any military flashbang grenade, without assaulting the Guardian's senses whatsoever. In fact, the sound and sight seemed somehow beautiful, thought Wade, astonished. The glorious and explosive effects of Reinhardt's last light spell had destroyed one of Elrock's eyes, chipped away most of his skeletal armor around his face, and burned large portions of his chest and arms, while completely knocking the Ancient Lokri down in the process. Elrock landed belly up from Reinhardt's sacrificial explosion, with his deep cracked skull leaking heavy amounts of black blood, killing all the grass within the immediate area. Before Elrock could even begin to lift his head, the elemental came down hard and fast on his throat, frantically moving its flamed dark green antlers back and forth without hesitation, until the deer had fully decapitated the Ancient, but not before Elrock had thrust upward both his oversized claws, plunging them both into the elemental's chest until it pierced its heart, corroding it away with his dark energy, before his arms went limp from the immediate loss of blood from his head. As Elrock's lifeless claws fell out of the deer's chest, dark green glowing blood flowed from the elemental's chest and poured onto Elrock's corpse, making a tree more beautiful than anything Wade had ever seen sprout forth from the Ancient remains, along with every flower and remarkable bit of colorful foliage that existed. Although mortally wounded, the forced elemental did not yet fall and scooped up Elrock's head with his antlers, which no longer glowed, and tossed his severed head to Thorn's feet, where he stood now grasping his dead brother's hammer with an iron grip. To Wade's utter shock, Elrock's head was still alive, and now offering Thorn unlimited power if he was simply to kneel to him and say yes. If you do, you'll have enough power to kill these weak nothings without even trying, and I will resurrect and we shall go to the Lord Samuel together, victorious and be given godlike powers. Elrock began monologuing with his practiced skill as Thorn interrupted him. Never compromise, said Thorn calmly. Never. Not in the greatest face of power, and not in the face of death. The ancient began nervously pleading harder in desperation as Thorn concluded his statement. "Do you know who taught me that?" asked Thorn with a bit more intensity and conviction in his voice, as Elrock's head still offered deals and pleas. "Do you know who taught me that?" said Thorn loudly and growling this time.
Do you?
Screamed Thorn.
Please,
wheezed out Elrock desperately.
"My brother,"
roared Thorn, as he brought Reinhardt's hammer down with all his strength on Elrock's remaining eye, sending an explosion of bone and black gore in all directions, as his head was completely eviscerated. Before the pieces of the ancient Lokri hit the ground, they seemed to burn away into nothing but wispy black smoke, until that too faded to black dust within the wind, which had now decided to breathe again, concluding the night's battle. The ancient's body faded to ash within the tree that was erected from the elemental's lifeblood and would serve as a nice fertilizer for young sapling. The forest elemental limped towards the guardians, leaving a trail of blooming flora in his wake wherever the last few trickles of his blood hit the ground. Everyone except Wade ran with haste to the deer's aid, where the latter bravely ran inside the mansion before swiftly returning with the handsome man's last gift, as his final instructions repeated through Wade's mind. Wade ran to join the others who were kneeling next to the deer, who lay on the ground surrounded by beautiful flowers and ivy as the remnants of its lifeblood drained out. With a strained effort, the deer managed to lift its head and look Wade in the eyes, and then to the jar he held. "Thank you for saving my life," said Wade, as the great deer, forest elemental and guardian, nodded at him once, laid down his head, and died. Before anyone could comment, a bright light gently rose from the deer's core, as beautiful moss instantly engulfed the deer's body, as its spirit raised high in the air, and then slowly began falling back towards the ground. As the growing spirit grew closer to the ground, lighting up the night like a divine flare, Wade opened the jar, and the sentient ball of descending energy made a conscious detour to the translucent container and went inside. Instantly, the runes engraved on the glass jar lit up the same color and brightness as the deer's spirit. "Quickly," yelled Wade. "We must let it go within the Tree of Life. John, hurry and unlock that door, and quickly, please." "I don't remember telling you about the tree," John said breathlessly, as he ran to keep up with Wade. "Between what you and Lokrin told me, I figured it out," Wade responded while John opened the locked door. As John finished opening the door, he winced at a laceration on his arm before turning the runes on his hand pink and healing the wounds within seconds. "Is it too cliché to say that I'm getting too old for this stuff?" John said as he opened up the locked door and pushed it wide open. There was a long hallway that was visibly led to a larger chamber ahead. Wade took off with Daniel at his heels and the rest in tow. "You've earned a peaceful retirement more than anyone I know," commented Ridden. "Maybe it's not such a bad—" "No," John cut him off. "Not until I kill Lokrin," John remarked. "Yeah, or he kills you," Warbane said. "Either way is fine with me," replied John, smiling as they caught up with the boys. Wade was taken aback by the glorious scene in front of him. Although the tree was mostly bare, it was a towering and marvelous pretty sight to behold. The limbs seemed to move ever so slowly, almost like they were breathing, with bark made of white and leaves of sky blue, and held a little over a dozen pieces of glowing fruit, each varying in color, in which Wade and Daniel now knew to be mana. "It's gotten worse," Ridden said glumly. "Yes," answered John. "The more trees of life that evil corrupts, the worse it gets." Wade ran to the front of the gargantuanly thick tree, where a large triangular opening stood at the base of the tree, and opened the jar. The forest elemental's spirit floated towards the opening at the bottom of the tree, and as it crossed the threshold and into the beyond, an explosion of light seemed to happen everywhere, obstructing the Guardian's vision until the light slowly faded away, leaving an overwhelming feeling of positive energy and peaceful contentment in its stead, as the light left entirely, being replaced by an entire new and awe-inspiring scene thereafter. The tree that only moments ago stood almost barren and withered burst forth with an abundance of life. Its canopy now grew thick with blue leaves, so overwhelmingly the roof that it looked as if one were to stare at the sky itself. Every limb in which the white bark seemed to glow now was filled to the brim with large, glowing and pulsating mana, in which the fairies now circled around like a picture straight out of a fantasy novel. The fairies seemed to be originating from the triangular opening at the base of the Tree of Life, which not only had opened larger, but emanated a golden light coming from within. "Amazing," said John in a happy, yet still bewildered tone as a smile grew on his face, completely different than the smirkish grin he usually wore before stating, "That would even balance it up a bit." "Indeed, it will, old friend," said Ridden, putting an arm softly on John's shoulder. After a moment, Ridden removed his arm and turned to John seriously. "We are going to have a lot to tell Auriella," he said, staring into the golden light emanating from the tree. "Yeah," Thorn started. "Like who in the heck is the handsome man that saved our butts tonight? Although," said Thorn, "I'm starting to get a pretty good idea. At first I thought it was just some crazy powerful wizard or something." Thorn continued, "But who else would have a literal key to the gates of hell and a musical horn from heaven that essentially pretty much turns into a key too? I mean, we will discuss all that with Auriella on the other side of the veil," Ridden interjected logically. "It's time," yelled John, before looking directly at Wade and Daniel with an imperative look in his eyes. "It's time to make a choice, boys," John said a bit softer this time. "One of two things is going to happen. One, I can perform a very quick and simple spell that will erase any memories or consequential side effects of the past few days. You will simply wake up in your beds with no memory of this. We would take care of the police, and Daniel will have a new boss without him or the rest of the world being any wiser. Or two, you can follow us through the Tree of Life and begin a whole new existence in a whole new world. However, access back through the veil, while permitted, is highly limited and monitored in most cases. You would join us in helping Auriella, the archangels, and the Creator in saving the world. And if things come to the worst possible ending, maybe even the universe. The Lokery plague is growing more every day, and they're just the beginning of this storm. There is far worse coming than what you saw tonight. Although tonight was an easy 8 out of 10 on the stuff you could get into scale, but there are more ways to help than fighting, of course. I was just impressed by the two of you, to be honest," said John, seriously. "Boys," John said, glancing at each of them, "no matter what you choose," but was cut off by Wade sprinting into the tree at full speed as he vanished with a small flash of light. "Now that's the spirit," yelled Thorn, laughing as they all turned their heads to look at Daniel now. "I got nothing tying me down here," said Daniel, "and it would be nice to keep up with this feeling of purpose and self-growth," as he straightened his back and began walking towards the portal. Slowly but surely. As they all neared the tree, Daniel smiled and looked at Thorn, who he felt he was most comfortable with out of all the Lycans, and spoke. "Besides," Daniel started, "I wouldn't mind meeting Rose in person, man. That fierceness and beauty, it's something else." "Ooh," said Thorn, with the rest of the Lycans following suit, as if Daniel had mentioned something both completely hilarious and wholly taboo. "You know that's John's daughter, right?" Warbrained asked Daniel in a low volume. "Yeah, and she's single," yelled Thorn, much louder and nudging Daniel playfully with his shoulder. Almost knocked him over completely. "Sorry," said Thorn, as he helped righten Daniel's stance. Daniel chanced a nervous look at John, where he was staring at Daniel intensely, and Daniel found himself horribly unable to look away. "I just started to like you, boy," said John. "I'd hate to ruin that by showing you how it feels to have a flaming metal hand shoved up your butt." The laughter of the Guardians echoed through the large chamber as they reached the tree and followed Wade into the portal and across the veil. "Not much further," the woman said to her assistant. "The energy signature is just around the bend here," she said, pointing to the curve in the trail coming up ahead, appearing out of the thick forest. The woman and her assistant walked down the trail for about a mile until it seemed to veer right into a beautiful oasis that was in a large and equally beautiful clearing. Before the pair walked down much further, a small whitish gold light became visible, hovering just 3 feet off the ground. As the two moved closer, a small congregation of fairies became visible, pink radiant dots circling the whitish gold orb almost protectively. "I've never seen that many fairies at once," her assistant worried. "Have you, ma'am?" he said, asking his mentor. "Only once," said the scientist, "back when my team was allowed an audience with the forest god." "One of the elementals, you mean?" asked her assistant. "Yes," she answered, before the tablet she was holding began making urgent sounds as the screen was glowing in places. "What is it, ma'am?" asked the assistant. "Something's happening," she answered. "Its molecular structure is changing rapidly, with a dark green flash and a small cry. The orb of light vanished, and in its place stood a baby deer with dark green, yet brightly illuminated eyes. The fairies started circling the newborn deer more and more quickly, until the fairies vanished, and the deer along with them. The lead scientist began frantically pressing buttons on her tablet, almost dropping it in the process, before a stern voice finally answered the device's speakers. "What's the issue?" "We just received Ridden Squad unit, with some fresh initiates arriving from the mountain sanctuary there, along with John himself. They are telling us some pretty disturbing updates that..." "Target," the woman screamed, panicked and impatient. "We just witnessed a forest elemental being born not 21 miles from the main house." "Get back here on the double," ordered Taggart. "You're gonna need to talk to John and the rest now." "What's happening, Tag?" she asked, worried. "Things are changing," Katerina answered Taggart before pausing and exhaling deeply. "The storm. It's coming."